Wyoming Territory, October 1878. The wind howled low across the plains the morning Dawson Pike found the woman bleeding on the dirt floor of his barn. He was halfway through saddling his horse when he froze. Not because of the cold, though the air had that sharp edge that warned winter was coming early. It was the sound ragged breathing, too shallow, too human to be an animal. He stepped slow, cautious, toward the far stall. Sunlight caught the edge of torn lace beside the hay pile. She was curled up tight, as if trying to vanish into the shadows. Her dress was ripped, her lips split, one eye swollen shut. Blood dried in streaks across her temple and neck. A thick bruise wrapped around her throat like a cruel necklace. "Ma'am." Dawson crouched beside her, not touching. "Can you hear me?" Her good eye fluttered open. She recoiled, breathing fast through her nose like a cornered animal. "I ain't gonna hurt you," he said, voice low. "Name's Dawson. You're safe now." She trembled hard, but something in his voice must have reached her. Her body eased, just slightly. He took his coat off and laid it over her. "What's your name?" Her lips moved, but no sound came. Her mouth tried again. "Lena," she whispered. "All right, Lena. I'm gonna get you inside. You hold on, all right?" She nodded once, then passed out cold. Dawson carried her into the cabin cradled against his chest. She was light as a bird, barely more than bones. He laid her on the bed, covered her with quilts, and lit the stove. He worked quick, focused, like he did when a colt was down in the field. Clean water, bandages, pain tincture. She flinched when he touched her, even gently, but never tried to stop him. He did not ask questions. Not yet. By nightfall, the swelling in her face had eased enough that both eyes were open. She watched him from the bed, silent, guarded. The silence didn't bother him. He was used to it. For the last 7 years, silence had been his only company. "You want soup?" he asked, setting a tin cup on the small table. "It's rabbit. Caught it yesterday." She nodded. He handed it to her, careful not to brush her hands. She drank slow, both hands wrapped around the cup like it might disappear. He leaned back in the chair across from her. The fire crackled steady between them. "You ran from someone," he said. Lena's eyes dropped. "I ain't asking for the whole story," Dawson said. "You don't owe me that. Just need to know if someone's going to come looking." She hesitated, then shook her head. "He thinks I'm dead." Dawson's jaw clenched. He did not ask who he was. She would tell him when she was ready. She looked up. "Why did you help me?" He met her gaze. "Because you needed it." That was all. 2 days passed. She did not speak much, but she watched him. When he fed the horses, chopped wood, mended the broken fence rail, her eyes followed him like she was trying to figure him out. He let her. He did not press her to talk. The scars on his own past lived quiet behind his eyes. He had once been a man with a wife and 2 daughters. Until the sickness took them, one by one, in the hard winter of 1871. He had buried them in the frozen ground behind this very cabin. After that, he stopped speaking to anyone who did not need to be spoken to. So when Lena sat beside him on the porch the evening of the 3rd day, he did not ask why. He just handed her a wool blanket and let her sit close. "My name is Lena Rosewood," she said quietly. He turned his head toward her, but did not speak. "I was supposed to marry a man in Rawlins. My father arranged it. Said it would save the family. But the man he gave me to, he was cruel." Her voice wavered. "He beat me the first night. Said I belonged to him now. I ran when I could." Dawson's hand tightened around the cup in his lap. "I thought I was going to die out there." She looked out toward the fading sun. "And then I saw your barn." She turned to him. "Why do you live out here alone?" He stared forward. "Because I lost everything that mattered." A long silence stretched between them. "I am sorry," she said softly. He nodded once. Then she surprised him by reaching for his hand. Her fingers were cold, but steady. He did not pull away. By the end of the week, color had returned to her cheeks. She moved easier, helped him with small things, peeling potatoes, sweeping the porch, brushing his mare. She smiled once when he made a dry joke about her soup being better than his, and it hit him in the chest like a strike. It had been years since a woman smiled at him like that. That night, she stood behind him while he lit the fire. Her voice was soft. "Dawson." He turned. She stepped closer. Her fingers brushed his arm. "Thank you for saving me." "You saved yourself," he said. "I just gave you a place to land." She looked up at him, eyes shining. "Still, you were kind when you did not have to be." He looked at her for a long moment, then reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath caught. "Lena," he said, voice rough. I do not know what this is yet. But I am not running from it. She stepped closer, hands slipping into his. Me neither. And then, slowly, she rose on her toes and kissed him. It was gentle, hesitant until he leaned down and kissed her back, long and deep, like he was waking up from a long, cold dream. When they finally pulled apart, her forehead rested against his. I did not think I would ever feel safe again, she whispered. You were safe here, he said. With me. And he meant it. Every word. The first snow came quiet, just a dusting over the dry grass and fence posts, but it changed the rhythm of things. Dawson shifted his work earlier, before the light thinned too much to see the nails in the wood or the taut lines of the horses' backs. Lena woke each morning before he did now, stoking the fire low and steady, boiling water for coffee, sometimes humming under her breath, so soft it barely reached the edge of his hearing. He didn't ask about the song. She didn't offer. One afternoon, after hauling sacks of oats from the shed, Dawson found her in the lean-to, hanging herbs in bunches from the rafters with twine. You grow those. She glanced down from the stool. Picked him near the creek before the frost got all of it. Angelica root, mostly. Some yarrow. They help when lungs go tight. He looked at the tidy knots, the even spacing. You know plants. She stepped down, brushing dust from her skirt. My mother did. She taught me before she passed. I always remembered what she said about how things grow where they're most needed. Dawson leaned against the doorframe, watching her test the strength of a knot with a tug. You think that's true? I do. She tied the last one and turned, her fingers stained with sap. Even weeds have purpose if you watch long enough. He nodded, and they walked back to the cabin side by side. That evening, Lena stood by the window, her hair damp from washing, pulled back with a strip of muslin. The light from the lantern drew a soft glow around her as she stared out at the dark. I used to think the worst thing was being alone, she said without turning. But it's not. It's being with someone who makes you feel invisible. Dawson didn't speak. The words didn't ask for comfort, only space to exist. She turned then. You ever been angry at God, Dawson? He met her eyes. I buried 3 people I loved in one winter. I still ain't sure who I was more angry at, him or myself. Lena stepped closer, her hand lifting until it settled over his heart. You carry it like a stone. He covered her hand with his, rough over soft. Some days I forget how to set it down, he said. She leaned her forehead into his chest. Then let me carry part of it. They stood like that for a long time, the fire hissing low behind them, the wind whispering against the window panes. 2 days later, Dawson brought in the last of the firewood. He laid the day's mail on the table, a single envelope, the paper thinned from folding. Lena's eyes flicked to it, then away. From town, she asked. He nodded. That a man there brings it out twice a month. This one's from an old army friend. Just checking to see if I'm still breathing. She smiled faintly, then returned to stitching the hem of a curtain. The thread moved steady through the fabric, her hands light but sure. I've been thinking about staying, she said after a while. He looked up from where he was oiling his saddle. You don't owe me that. It's not a debt, she said. It's a choice. Dawson set the cloth down. You sure? She tied off the thread and laid the fabric aside. I know what it feels like to have no say. I know what it feels like to run. This, she gestured to the room, the stove, the smell of pine pitch and cinnamon bark drying by the hearth. This feels like a beginning. He rose slowly, his boots quiet against the floorboards. When he reached her, he didn't touch her right away, just looked at her, as if memorizing the shape of her face in the lantern light. What would you need? He asked. A place to work. A garden come spring. Maybe some hens. She smiled. And someone who doesn't walk away when I speak the truth. You'll have all that, he said. And more. Then he drew her close, his hand at the small of her back. She rested her cheek against his shoulder. I ain't the same man I was, he said quietly. I wouldn't want you to be, she whispered. Outside, the snow deepened, soft over the roof, quiet over the land. Inside, the warmth held. The two of them stood close, not because of fear or necessity, but because they wanted to. By late November, the wind had turned mean, biting through wool and leather, rattling the walls like it was looking for a way in. Dawson had reinforced the shutters twice already, and he still caught himself listening at night for loose hinges or boards that might need fixing come morning. Lena had taken to sketching plans in charcoal on old feed sack paper, her handwriting narrow and slanted. She'd drawn a garden bed near the south fence where the sun stretched long, and marked where to build a coop once the snow cleared. She didn't ask permission, just began drawing as if she already belonged to the land. That evening, Dawson found her kneeling beside the hearth, rearranging stones in a shallow arc by the fire. "What's that for?" he asked, setting down the tin box of cartridges he'd been sorting. She brushed soot from her skirt. "In the mountains, my mother said stones near the fire kept the heat longer. For drying cloth, warming bread, easing aches." He crouched beside her. "Does it work? You'll see tomorrow. Your boots will be dry before sunup." He studied the curve of her brow as she leaned forward to adjust a flat stone. "You think you'll miss city ways?" She gave a small shake of her head. "I never belonged to parlors and piano lessons. I like the quiet places even then. You strike me as someone who knows her own mind." She looked over at him. "You say that like it's a rare thing." "It is, most places." She smiled, but it was different this time, wider, easier, like the tension that once clung to her spine had begun to loosen. "What about you? You ever think of leaving this place?" "I used to," he said. "Thought of heading south once. But something always held me here." He didn't say it aloud, but he knew now that what had held him was waiting. The next morning, Lena stood near the gate with a pair of gloves she'd stitched from old flannel. She held them out. "They're not pretty," she said, "but they'll keep your fingers from freezing." Dawson slid them on. The fit was snug and warm, the seams tight. "You sew like a saddle maker," he said. She tilted her head. "That a compliment?" He flexed his fingers. "It is." Later, they walked the property line together, checking for signs of elk or coyotes. The snow had crusted overnight, making it easier to track. Lena paused near a half-fallen cottonwood, her breath clouding the air. "That your family's graves?" she asked quietly. He nodded once. "I don't take strangers there." She didn't press, just looked toward the slope and said, "When spring comes, I'll plant something there. If you want." He cleared his throat. "I'd like that." That night, a storm rolled in sudden and hard. Dawson secured the barn while Lena lit every lamp in the cabin and boiled water in case the chimney flue froze. When he came in, soaked through and shivering, she met him with a dry towel and a bowl of stew already warming. "Sit," she said, pressing the bowl into his hands. "You look like you fought the mountain." "I think it won," he muttered, steam rising from the broth. She knelt beside him, drying his hair with the towel, her fingers working slow. "You're not afraid of storms?" he asked. "I used to be. But they pass." He looked down at her, her face close to his, the lantern glow catching the slope of her cheek and the curve of her jaw. He reached up, brushed her hair back with the side of his hand. "I want you to stay," he said. She didn't answer right away, just leaned into his palm. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Not out of fear. Because I choose to." Dawson set the bowl aside and pulled her into his lap. She fit against him like she'd always belonged there, like the missing piece of a life he'd stopped believing might be whole again. "I've never asked for anything I didn't think I could keep," he said softly. "But I want to build something with you." Her arms wrapped around his neck. "Then let's build it, Dawson." Day by day. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, the fire held strong. By mid-December, the sun rose late and slipped away early, casting everything in long, cold shadows that stretched across the snow-covered fields. Dawson had taken to bringing in extra water at night, since the pump froze solid most mornings. Lena kept a kettle warm on the back of the stove, and they'd fallen into a rhythm that didn't need much saying. One morning, while Dawson was splitting cedar near the barn, Lena came out with her shawl pulled tight and a folded cloth in her hands. "You ever think about adding onto the cabin?" she asked, eyes squinting against the light off the snow. He paused, resting the axe against his thigh. "What for?" She held out the cloth. "I found this tucked behind the hearthstone's a drawing. Looked like someone was planning a second room." He took it, brushing bark dust from his palms. The drawing was old, the pencil lines faint but careful. Measurements, a sketch of a window facing west, and a note in the corner in his own hand, from Mary's reading light. Dawson's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean to pry," Lena said, stepping back slightly. "I was cleaning out the grate, and it slid loose." He folded the paper once, then again, and handed it back to her. "I never finished it," he said. "Didn't see the point, after." She tucked the cloth back under her arm. "Maybe now there's a reason." He looked at her, hair curling from beneath her bonnet, cheeks reddened from the cold, and said nothing for a long while. Later that day, he came in with frost stiffening his coat and found her kneeling by a wooden crate near the hearth, sorting through buttons and scraps of fabric. "You make clothes?" he asked. "I can mend, well enough," she said, holding up a sleeve torn at the cuff. I was thinking, come spring, we could trade for linen in town. He hung his coat by the door, hands brushing against the worn wool. You want to go to town? I do, she said, not looking up. Not to stay. Just to look people in the eye again. He sat across from her, stretching out his legs. You think the man who hurt you's still somewhere near? I don't know, she said. But if I let that fear decide everything, I'll never be free of him. He nodded slowly. Then we'll go together. When the road's clear. For the first time, she reached for his hand without hesitation. Thank you. That night, they sat by the fire as the wind rattled the chimney. Dawson opened a ledger he hadn't touched in years, blowing dust from the cover. Inside were lists of cattle births, feed costs, repairs. He flipped to the back, where blank pages waited. I've been thinking about raising more than just horses, he said, scanning the paper. Maybe beef stock. Enough to trade regular. Lena looked over from where she was darning a wool sock. You'd need fencing, a new gate, and hands you can trust. He nodded. I'd need someone to help keep the books, too. She set the sock aside. You planning to hire someone? He looked up. I was hoping you'd want the work. She smiled, not wide, but with a kind of quiet pride. Then you better teach me the rest of those numbers. The next day, she stood beside him as he saddled the bay gelding. The sky was pale and hard, the clouds hanging low. You riding out? She asked. Just to the ridge, to check the fence line. I'll be back before dark. She reached up, tucking a small bundle of herbs into his coat pocket. For your shoulder. You favor it when the cold sets in. He looked down at her, surprised. How'd you notice that? I watched, she said. Same as you do. He leaned down, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I'll be back soon. When he returned, dust curling along the edges of the land, he found her standing at the stove, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair braided back with a strip of red cloth. You're late, she said, though her voice held no itch. Fence was worse than I thought. Couple rails down. She stirred the pot without looking at him. You'll need help fixing it. He came up behind her, rested a hand lightly on her waist. You volunteering? She turned then, her eyes steady. I'm not going anywhere, Dawson. Whatever needs doing, I'll do it beside you. He kissed her then, slow and sure, and when they sat down to eat, the table between them felt less like a place of passing meals and more like the start of a home. Outside, the wind died down. Inside, the silence held something full. January brought a stillness that seemed to seep into the bones of the land. Snow deepened along the fence lines, and the creek behind the barn froze solid, its surface shining like glass beneath the overcast sky. The days passed slow but steady, marked by the work of survival, hauling water in iron pails, drying jerky over the stove, mending worn boot soles with linen thread. When Dawson's mare foaled too early for the season, he and Lena stayed up through the night, taking turns rubbing warmth into the shivering colt. Lena knelt beside the mare's flank, her hands steady even as her breath fogged in the cold. She didn't speak much, only worked until the colt finally stood, legs wobbling, but upright. You've got grit, Dawson said, watching her stroke the mare's muzzle. Most would have panicked. I've seen things more frightening than snow and blood, she said, brushing straw from her skirt. This I can handle. The colt lived. Lena named him Alder. By February, the cabin had grown warmer not just from the fire, but from the rhythm of two people sharing space without crowding it. Dawson carved a narrow shelf along the west wall, not saying much about it, but he lined it with the small things she'd started collecting, a folded handkerchief embroidered with red thread, a smooth river stone she liked the feel of, a bit of dried lavender bound with string. She didn't comment on the shelf either, just added to it when she pleased. One morning, she found him sharpening a draw knife at the workbench. His brow was drawn, and his left hand trembled slightly over the handle. You're in pain, she said. He didn't look up. It'll pass. Let me make a poultice. I've managed worse. She stepped closer, voice quiet. Why won't you let me help? He set the knife down, exhaling slow. Because I lived a long time thinking I had to do everything alone. Forgot what it felt like to lean on someone. She laid her hand over his. Then remember with me. He didn't pull away. That night, over a supper of boiled squash and biscuits, Dawson set down his fork and said, I've been thinking about the spring. Lena sipped her tea. What about it? There's a man in Saratoga, old friend from before. He's got a sawmill and a pair of hands he trusts. If I ride out next week, I could bring back enough lumber to build that second room. She set her cup down carefully. You'd be gone near a week. I'd take the gelding. He He's strong enough for the load. I'd be quick. She folded her hands in her lap. You're asking because you want to know if I'd stay while you're gone. I'm not used to someone waiting on me. I'm not used to being waited for. He leaned in, elbows on the table. But here we are. She reached for his hand. Bring back enough for a window. He smiled, a quiet thing that reached his eyes. I'll bring back two. Dawson left at dawn 3 days later. Lena watched from the porch, arms wrapped around herself, until the shape of him disappeared behind the ridge. She spent the days tending to alder, sewing new curtains from a bolt of wool she'd bartered for last fall, and reading from the worn Bible Dawson had kept tucked between the flour sacks. He returned on the 6th day, frost clinging to his coat and a wagon half loaded with lumber behind him. The moment she saw him, she ran, no hesitation, no second-guessing, and threw her arms around his neck. I told the wind to bring you home, she said into his collar. Guess it listened, he murmured. The next weeks were full of sawdust and hammer blows, Lena holding boards steady while Dawson nailed them in place. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, he stood in the doorway of the half-built room, brushing wood shavings from his sleeves. I want to ask you something, and I don't want you to think I'm asking out of obligation. She leaned against the frame, sleeves rolled, face warm from the spring light. All right. I want to marry you, he said. Not because it's what's expected. Because you're the first person I've ever met who makes this place feel like something more than a memory. She didn't answer right away, just walked to him and placed her hand over his heart. I never thought I'd trust a man again, she said. But I trust you. He brought her hand to his lips. Is that a yes? She nodded. It's a yes. They were married by the circuit preacher 2 weeks later, just as the first shoots of green pushed up through the thawing ground. Dawson wore his best shirt, and Lena wore a dress she'd stitched from a bolt of blue calico she'd kept hidden since before she fled Rollins. The preacher said the words quick, with a dry voice and kind eyes, and they signed a ledger together, hands steady. That night, they danced in the kitchen to the sound of the wind through the cedar trees. There was no music, only the soft shuffle of boots on worn floorboards and the quiet laughter that rose between them when Dawson stepped on her toe. You're terrible at this, she said, breathless. You married me anyway, he said. In the months that followed, the second room filled with warmth and sunlight. Lena planted a row of sweet peas beneath the west window, and Dawson built her a bench from leftover pine boards. They added hens, 2 milk goats, and a dog that wandered in from the hills and never left again. Each evening, they sat on the porch together, watching the sky fade from gold to blue. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't need to. One summer night, with the air warm and the world soft around them, Lena rested her head on Dawson's shoulder and whispered, "This is the life I never thought I'd have." He kissed the crown of her head. "It's ours, every bit of it." And it was. Their days were not always easy, but they were shared, and that made all the difference. The past no longer held them by the throat. They had each other, a home built with their own hands, and the quiet promise of years yet to come. In the end, there was nothing unfinished. No loose ends. Just 2 people who had found their way through the dark and into the light together.